Are you ready for rapid fire?
I think I'm pretty clearly ready for rapid fire now.
Let's do it then. So we are going to be able to talk with new Notre Dame running backs coach Ja'Juan Seider for the first time tomorrow. He's going to have a press conference. Is there something you're most anxious or curious to find out about his philosophy/approach?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would be most anxious or curious to find out would be just his overall kind of snap breakdown for the running backs again. Is it going to be kind of that same, 1A, 1B breakdown, and having, a third down back? They're going to get healthier in the running back room this year with Payne coming back. And so, what effect does that have on either Love or Jadarian? And then, some of those, again, Aeneas Williams, some of these other young backs that are going to be in there. So, there's a potential that you could have 5 working running backs in that room. And so what does that look like? How are you getting those guys on the field? How are you prioritizing, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price still? Because I think they're going to still be your best running backs in the room. And, I think that him and his experience at Penn State is something that's going to be beneficial at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that's. And then maybe, if someone sneaks in the question of, hey, do you believe in a 2-back philosophy by any chance? Like, could we alleviate that with seeing maybe some more 2-backs on the field?
You're talking about like 21 personnel type
Yeah.
stuff. I don't know how much of that's going to be him and how much is going to be Mike Denbrock, though. That's a good
Or if
question.
he has influence, if maybe something that he sees could be beneficial to this team type situation. And then the last part of it would be, Dylan, before he left, did a really good job of setting the standard about what it means to be a Notre Dame running back. And so does he share those kind of similar ideas, that checklist of what you have to do and meeting that standard? I don't want the criteria to lessen. I want these running backs to be continuously held to a high standard because it's shown to be impactful on the field. And so I think those are the 2 things that I would be most curious to kind of listen into.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of what you started with in terms of D'Lo McCullough from the time he came in the door at Notre Dame when he was hired and we got to talk to him for the first time. It was very obvious, one, that he was very confident, like in himself, both in his, ability to coach and communicate and to recruit as well. But 2, he talked right away about the list of the 8 jobs, for the running backs. And like, that's how you keep all these guys involved. One thing we know from, in terms of Seider is you look at what Penn State did this past season with Allen and Singleton. They both ran for over 1,000 yards. So, that he's got a willingness, to use 2 different guys situationally. So I think that, at least in terms of the top 2 guys, Love and Price, I wouldn't expect that there are going to be a lot of differences. But, how do the roles, what are his priorities, in terms of using guys in other roles, that kind of thing. So Tommy's asking me to make sure to ask for name pronunciation guidance so we all know. I don't know if that means that someone on another show has been saying his name differently, but according to the pronunciation guides that I have seen, including one that was sent out by Notre Dame, Ja'Juan Seider is how it's said. He'll be introduced tomorrow, so you'll actually hear someone, besides us say his name. I'm fairly confident in the pronunciation guides that I have seen. I've said before, if you're going to go by Brian's pronunciations, good luck. I have no problem saying that because I can name a pretty couple common names that I know for sure that the big guy is saying wrong. So that's all I'll say with that. Manti Te'o and former USC and NFL quarterback Cody Kessler are hosting Good Morning Football together this week. They've each gave their favorite players growing up from the other team. It's interesting that Manti, who of course played at Notre Dame, was a USC fan growing up, and Kessler, who played for USC, was a Notre Dame fan growing up. Manti's favorite USC players were Junior Seau, Reggie Bush, and Troy Polamalu. Kessler's favorite Notre Dame players were Tom Zivikowski, Brady Quinn, and Jimmy Clausen. So, Jesse, do you have a USC player who you liked growing up?
Yeah, my favorite USC player growing up couldn't be anyone of like the likes of Matt Leinart or Reggie Bush or any of that crew, because they broke the heart too many times when Notre Dame was actually good at football. So a guy that I enjoyed kind of watching and ended up having a really good NFL career would be Troy Polamalu. I think he was like he sometimes doesn't get lost, but just a really good quality NFL player. I love the way he always came downhill and was, take the big hits that he would put on running backs and wide receivers and stuff like that. So I would have to go with Troy Polamalu because, again, it's easier to do it for a defensive player because they're not the guy throwing for 400 yards or rushing for, all these touchdowns and yards and stuff and having an impact on the game in terms of scoring. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at, Troy Polamalu.
I wondered if maybe that's who yours would be, Troy Polamalu. I didn't know like if Reggie Bush might slide in there for you.
Couldn't.
I didn't think so. Bush push and all. Mine, obviously goes back a little bit farther because we're talking DK. No.
Let me guess yours. No. I think it would be Marcus Allen.
You nailed it. Took the words right out of my mouth.
So I know Marcus Allen was a great Chiefs running back, so I think that made it a little bit easier for you. Someone I considered, but I always like to do these for players I actually grew up and watched or kind of was at least around and experienced, right? So it's like you can't really go with O.J. Simpson or Marcus Allen or those types of players.
And that was kind of the spirit of the question, was guys that you actually grew up watching. And obviously, even before Marcus Allen got to Kansas City, he was with the Raiders and obviously USC before that. But like, even like I would throw Charles White, like White and Allen were back to back there at the end of the 70s. Like Marcus Allen was just so smooth and could, just glide it, and he never seemed to take the big hits, and just always had the good personality, I think, to go along with it. And you actually, do you remember when you got to meet him at the College Football Hall of Fame, or are you too young to remember that?
No, I remember meeting him. I couldn't remember the exact moment, but I do know I met him and I got to meet Emmitt Smith at one point. So yeah, I met some pretty good running backs in my day.
There were a lot back in those days. Yeah, so Marcus Allen was mine. What about an easier one? Who's your least favorite / most despised USC player?
So I think, a lot of people, the easy answers would be like, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush. Who was the other? There was another quarterback that was right after Leinart. It wasn't as, Mark Sanchez. You could put any of those
Carson
names.
Palmer came before him. I think Sanchez came right after him.
Was Barkley another one? I want to say Barkley was a quarterback for USC.
Yeah.
I know that's not right. But anyways, long story short, I got to go with Keyshawn Johnson because he's a guy who continuously runs his mouth
I like it.
about Notre Dame. And before that 2023 game called Notre Dame a dump, just for a guy that I think he only played Notre Dame twice because he was a 2-year guy. One of the years they beat him. Another year they actually tied, coincidentally enough, when Keyshawn, I think in '94 when they played. So, it's just a guy. It's not like he really dominated Notre Dame or had all this great success against Notre Dame. And since the 2000s, or recent, Notre Dame's been dominating the series and kind of winning the important games. And so I just didn't like Keyshawn Johnson. Just seems to run his mouth a little bit for someone that's not like in the depths of the trenches of the rivalry.
Yeah. Well, I know. He's always like in terms of the Notre Dame USC rivalry, Keyshawn Johnson has definitely been the most outspoken, like anti Notre Dame USC guy. I think
the dump comment was just so unwarranted.
Yeah. I mean, because
like the Coliseum is so much better than
his palace. Like, come on, man. Like, he's obviously been there quite a bit. And while they're both old stadiums, I would definitely, and I think most fans would, especially inside out and the general odor of Notre Dame Stadium compared to the Coliseum, I would definitely take that.
I did have it right. It was Matt Barkley. That's the name I was thinking of.
That was it.
It was
Mine
the
is Ronnie
blonde-haired
Lott.
guy.
My most despised is Ronnie Lott. Now, granted, a good deal of it has to do with the fact that he played for those great 49ers teams of the 1980s.
That's like a double whammy for you.
But it goes back to USC. And the guy was just trucking people left and right, and like he was a great player, and I can definitely appreciate him as a player a lot more now. But back in his playing days, Ronnie Lott was at the top of the list. Okay, even easier one. Who is your most favorite Notre Dame player from your
So this isn't easy because it's hard to narrow the list down to one person. I'll do my good old favorite for you. I'll give you one offense and one defense. Defense, I'll go Manti Te'o.
Okay.
Offense, it's tough, but I have to go with Jeff Samardzija because of the way he dominated in baseball as well.
Is Golden Tate your number 2?
Or Brady Quinn. It's
Brady
really
Quinn?
close.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was Samardzija and
if
Tate.
you force me to pick one overall, it would be Manti Te'o. But I just think it's always fun to put an offensive person in there as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, like growing up, like you got to be there for. I mean, that like I kind of call that like the rock star heyday. Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, Tom Zibikowski, that whole group. It was like a rock band. Like
there was star power.
Yeah, you had the long-haired Samardzija and Zibikowski, with his buzzed hair and like just the boxing and the whole thing, and then Brady Quinn with his chiseled jaw, lead singer, good looks and all that kind of stuff. You could easily see Zibikowski banging back there on the drums and Samardzija just rocking out on the guitar and the whole thing. So, yep, and I agree with Anthony. For mine was Rocket. Now, granted, he was a little bit, like more toward my teenage years than young, but like from, it's been long enough. We're going on almost 40 years at this point. So Rocket is number 1, just the explosive, like nobody before him, nobody since has who's put on a Notre Dame uniform has had that kind of explosiveness and just sheer game-changing ability anytime he touched the football. And there have been, a lot of greats, but for me, it was Rocket for sure. Okay, so we're going to get into the Notre Dame women's basketball. And by the way, thank you, Anthony, for the super chat that you sent in there. We always appreciate it when you do that. Speaking of people who hate Notre Dame, Diana Taurasi apparently is retiring. I've never heard Diana Taurasi have one good thing to say about Notre Dame either. So good luck, good riddance, whatever. Diana Taurasi was a freshman in the 2000-2001 season. That was my first season calling Notre Dame women's basketball games when they won the national championship that year. And of course, she went on to win championships, plural, with UConn. But Notre Dame and UConn played 3 times that season. And I know in the 2 losses that UConn had to Notre Dame, she had 2 of her worst games of the season. Did not shoot well at all. Again, went on, did great things. It's amazing to me, like when you think that she was a freshman that year, Neil Ivey was a 5th-year senior that year, and Diana Taurasi is just now retiring 24 years later. It's kind of amazing. She's obviously had a great and illustrious career, but it doesn't mean we have to like her.
That's pretty funny, actually.
So she did actually show more respect for Hannah Hidalgo last year out there when Notre Dame beat UConn than Stewart did. So for whatever that's worth. Okay, so Notre Dame women's basketball saw its 19-game winning streak end with Sunday's double overtime loss at NC State. Do you buy or sell the loss could be good for the Irish?
So I don't. This is a tough question. I think it's up to the team and ultimately how it's supposed to go. they just got the number 1 ranking. They had a tough matchup with Duke earlier in the week. They go down to Miami and handle business, but then don't get the opportunity to kind of come back home and reset. It was kind of that atypical or prolonged road trip. And so bouncing around, and I know when they were in Miami, they got a lot of, feedback or visits from a lot of ex-players, a lot of people of influence within the women's basketball industry. I know they went to one of those like professional basketball games as well, I think in one of the off days. And so I just think that it all kind of caught up to them at the end of the day. The number 1 seed, the long road trip, kind of people starting to talk to them about expectations and how to handle, greatness and being one of the top teams in the country and what it takes to accomplish that ultimate goal. And then you throw in NC State, 19-game home winning streak, a number 12 team in the country, a really good team, only 2 losses in the ACC so far. So, this is on the players to determine. I personally think it will be a good thing because I think it's humbling. You can't win every single game unless you're like UConn or South Carolina, where like that barely happens. But, to me, this was like a solid, almost Elite 8 type matchup for Notre Dame, kind of, on the latter half of the season here. And it went to double overtime on a true road environment. And so I don't know, Notre Dame didn't play its best game, and we'll kind of maybe talk about that here in a little bit, but
we will.
It's essentially a tie game on the road on a noon game in a sellout arena in North Carolina. They're not going to play many more games like that aren't.
They will play zero. They will play 0 games in that kind of environment. Unless with the exception of what the home crowd looks like these next couple of games in the NCAA tournament. They will not have to play in a hostile environment like that again. I will say. And like I know you were watching it on TV, and I think you and Vince were both kind of texting me, from time to time. I mean, I know you both were, but like the environment that was like, other than UConn and maybe even on par with UConn, that was one of the better road environments that I've seen Notre Dame played in for a women's basketball game. It was nuts in there. Students just packed, to the top of the rafters and, into the game the whole time. Obviously the home crowd was going crazy, so like, just from that aspect, one, give them credit for that. But like you said, double overtime on the road in a noon game against a really good team. It's not like this was a fluke, like this is still the second best team in the ACC. And, now they're going to battle down these last couple of games to the end of the regular season for who's going to win the ACC. But like, this is a really good team that went to the Final Four last year and returned, I think, like 75%, of their
the other part of
from that team.
Sanaya Rivers and Isaiah James are first-round draft picks in themselves. They're going to be top 15 players in the WNBA draft. And so you combine that with Olivia Miles, Sony Citron, and Maddie Westbelt, you got 5 first-round draft picks all on the floor, 3 Notre Dame, 2 North Carolina State, playing at the end of the day. And so, like you said, I just think that it caught up to them a little bit, because I don't think that Hannah had especially her best performance. And really, this isn't a one-off situation. The women's team has now lost to North Carolina State in the regular season 3 straight matchups. They got them last year in the ACC tournament, but regular season matchups, North Carolina State has now won 3 of these in a row. And I'll tell you what, they're never blowouts. And when they played the ACC tournament, Notre Dame won by 4 points and had to come back late and finish that game.
Right.
So, these games with North Carolina State are very close. It's just one of those opponents where North Carolina State is always really good. Notre Dame is always really good, and they match up well. And it was on the road, and it went to double overtime. That's basically a tie game. Like if you're really thinking about it, it's a tie game, but you had to find a winner at some point, and that was North Carolina State. Because that was the frustrating part about this game when watching it, is Notre Dame would keep it within 2 to 4, and every time they'd get a basket, North Carolina State would race down and get a basket.
Yeah, they just couldn't come up with the stops.
They couldn't get the stop after getting a basket of their own, right? Like, Notre Dame would miss a basket, North Carolina State would miss a basket. The only time North Carolina State would make a basket was when Notre Dame made a basket. At least was what it felt like, right? Like Notre Dame could never just pull, all the way ahead. And again, I'm not making excuses because I think Notre Dame is the better team and they should have won that game ultimately. But I thought defensively there was, signs of fatigue, lack of effort. I thought Hannah Hidalgo, and I know her thing is to bounce around a lot, but I felt like she was trailing a lot after not really staying with her man at certain times. And I thought in transition, Hannah kind of forced some passes here and there. I don't think she played her A game. I think that was kind of, in my opinion, the difference maker in the game.
Well, I mean, somebody brought up they were 40 of 97, so they still shot better. They still shot 41%, but they missed 57 shots in the game. They only turned the ball over 12 times, so it's not like they were completely reckless with the ball. To me, it's like NC State was able to get them out of their game a little bit because Notre Dame did a really good job of scoring transition points in the first half. NC State, I mean, I specifically remember you texted me like they were starting to run out of gas. So what did Westmore do? They reeled it in. They dialed it down. They slowed the pace. And that's where Notre Dame was affected. Before I get to more of that, though, I'll just say, yes, I do think that like you never hope for a loss. You never want a loss. But I do think that this can very similarly to they go to the Cayman Islands and they lose those two games right after beating number 3 USC on the road. I think that those two games really helped refocus this team and galvanize them. And then what they do, they went out and beat Texas and UConn right afterwards. So like, I do think that some of the things that happened in this game can really be used as a good talking point and some teaching points for Niele Ivey and her staff, because a big thing that also happened in this game, it's not just missing the shots. They only had 13 assists on 40 made field goals in the game. Notre Dame did. So that's about a 32% rate. For the season, they're 54% in terms of assists to made field goals. When they are at their best, they're doing a couple of different things. One, they're getting stops at the defensive end. Two, they turn that into transition points. But also, when they're in the half court, they're sharing the basketball. And they just didn't do enough of that on Saturday. They didn't make NC State have to work for it enough at the defensive end and break them down. And again, 30 assists on 40 made field goals. But, again, like you go back, 21 ties, 21 lead changes. I've never called a game like that, Jesse. I've never called a game with 21 ties and 21 lead changes. Usually, like if it's around 10 and 10 ties, 10 lead changes, like that's a pretty competitive game. There were 21 in a double overtime game. And, again, at the end of the day, with all that they faced, the fact that it went to double overtime and it was so back and forth throughout the day against another really good team, it's like sometimes it's just not your day. But I think it's definitely something that they can regroup and learn from going forward, especially when you're this close to the tournament. Like in terms of the timing, I think that you can definitely, that the coaching staff can definitely use this with some, good talking points going forward. Because look, you're going to get into the tournament, two different things. One, you're not going to face a team of NC State's caliber until basically around the Elite Eight. Like that's NC State's an Elite Eight Final Four type opponent. So you're not going to face that until you get there. You're not going to face that kind of environment until you get there. But what teams are likely going to want to do is slow the pace as much as possible to try to keep Notre Dame in half-court sets as much as possible.
For sure, and I think that this loss is a good kind of recalibration for Notre Dame, things to kind of work on for, if this type of game style presents itself, ACC tournament, NCAA tournament. But ultimately, you just won't see a combination of this again. Notre Dame missing the amount of shots, and a team that shot as well as efficient as NC State did. They shot like almost 45% from the field and from three at the end of the day. I know both those numbers were over 40% for sure. Anything over 30% is a really good clip from three to be over 40%. I mean, that was the ultimate difference maker in the game. And then, like you said too, I felt like Notre Dame kind of rushed their sets a little bit, and we're not taking or making the extra passes that we're used to seeing on offense. And I think that's really what hurt them, down the stretch too. So again, you're just not going to see a combination of that many missed shots and a team shoot kind of close to 45% from the field all around.
Well, and the other thing is, I know, like from a defensive perspective, because of how athletic that NC State is, I know Notre Dame wanted to be able to, and they played some zone here and there. They played more late, I think, than they did early. They wanted to do it, to be able to mix some in early, but NC State was hitting the threes early on. They didn't end up with a great 3-point percentage. NC State didn't, but in the first half they were 6 of 12. So it's like you're not going to be able to get into too many zone looks when the other team is hitting those kind of threes. But the other aspect of this, and look, you haven't heard me whine and moan and stuff about officiating and stuff like that. Notre Dame was whistled for 21 fouls. NC State 9. And NC State
got very ticky-tacky at the end.
They hit their first 20 free throws. Notre Dame didn't even shoot 20 free throws in the game. Notre Dame was 8 for 10. NC State ended up 24 of 26. In a game where both teams that's as intense as it is, and both teams are playing man-to-man throughout, you can't tell me that the fouls should be more than 2-1 in one team's favor. That's just way too far out of whack. And I look at, Tilda Trieger, their NC State's post player. She's a true freshman. She played 43 minutes in that game. No fouls. I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I saw too much contact in the paint to buy that. And again, it's not all about that, but that's just too big a disparity for me.
The ones that, and again, not to get too deep out into this rabbit hole, I think one of the things that really irked me was second overtime. NC State gets a bucket or two to start, and then Sony's called for that horrible offensive foul, and then NC State just goes on a crazy run. And again, I thought it was largely propelled by getting a basket, getting the ball back, and then getting another basket off of just that. It should even extend the arm, and the defensive player was nowhere close to be set. And it's like, you haven't called that kind of touchy stuff all game, but now you're calling it in double overtime, and this team subsequently goes on a run basically because of it and runs away with the game. I just felt like that was a big momentum turner in that second overtime of taking a possession away from Notre Dame.
Right. And obviously, late in the game, in the fourth quarter and in overtime, Hidalgo and Miles both had 4 fouls, so like people talking about their defense, there's only so much you can do at that point when you're playing with 4 fouls and you're trying to stay in till the end. Like you might remember, Niele Ivey was subbing Kassan Prosper. Offense defense with Olivia Miles to try to protect Olivia and to have a little bit, of an upgrade at the defensive end of the floor as well. Notre Dame took almost 20 more shots though than NC State, but got called for 12 more fouls than NC State. The math just doesn't add up. I'm sorry. Because again, like before that, their fouls, in terms of, fouls for the season, they're about 50-50. It's never been that lopsided. Like both Texas and UConn games, again, like when you look at the caliber of what they were playing, very similar. I do find it interesting that Billy Smith, the male official in the game, has officiated 2 of Notre Dame's 3 losses this season. He was down there in the Cayman Islands for the TCU loss. He's the one though who blew the foul. He made the call when Maddie Westfeld was shooting. He's the one who called. I couldn't believe that. The first thing I did was look at the clock. He called that foul, but then they went to the replay monitor and said no foul.
Oh yeah, they took the foul off. Yeah.
I still think they played it. I didn't get to see it on a TV screen.
I don't know how the call in the court didn't stand.
It looked to me like there was at least a 1/10 of a second left because they were showing it on the, like the Jumbotron monitor. in the arena. It looked like there was just a fraction of time left, but they waved it off. And if they don't do that, she's going to hit one of the 2 free throws and they win.
Did you ever hear what the medical emergency was?
So what I was told is, and for those watching, or for those who weren't watching, either way, so there was a long delay after Citron hits the shot at the end of regulation, and I had no idea. There was like an official from out talking. Turned out apparently someone in the stands had a heart attack, is what I was told.
Wow.
And
so much excitement, I guess.
Yeah, so the EMTs had to come, and there was a huge group of EMTs, and they took him out on a stretcher and out of the arena. Yeah, it was like right after Citron hit the shot. So, and I never, heard anything afterwards. Obviously, hopefully he's okay and everything. But, I don't, again, like to me, an Elite Eight type matchup, a great matchup, great environment, the whole thing. I think that there's a lot that I think Notre Dame can really kind of refocus on this going into the postseason and not have to worry about the winning streak and all those different kind of things. They've got a lot to play for to kind of keep them, motivated, and there's still going to be a target on their back because they're Notre Dame, but I think it shifts the target a little bit. Andy Saylor wants to know, will they still get a number 1 seed in the big tournament? Well, I mean, obviously it depends on how they finish out. The NCAA is going to put out the final pre-selection show seeding, the 1 through 16, Thursday night. Interestingly enough, I'll be over at Purcell Pavilion probably about the time this comes out, but they'll put out the 1 through 16 again. So we'll see what the committee thinks of Notre Dame, because there's been a lot of movement. South Carolina has lost, Notre Dame has lost, UCLA has lost, so there's been a lot that's happened since they put out the first seedings about a week and a half or so ago. But yeah. So we'll find. Long story short, I think yes, they have a really good chance of still getting a number 1 seed. Will they get the number 1 overall seed? I would say that odds are probably against that now, but they can still get one of the number 1 seeds, I think. Fill in the blank, Jess. Sonia Citron's buzzer-beating 3 to send the game to overtime was blank.
Was shocking, was electric, was out of nowhere. I don't know, like all of the above. Like it felt like they had a chance. I didn't think Sony was going to be the shooter of the ball, and I don't think she did either. I think the play kind of fell apart to a degree. I thought Olivia Miles was going to have something drawn up for her, and she was going to be the person shooting the ball. So it was an unexpected thriller, to be honest with you, because Sony made the best of a situation, and she chucked that thing up, and I think shocked everyone, and definitely took all the air out of the stadium and sent that thing, right into overtime, and just kind of continued this just kind of heavyweight fight that was going on because of what you were saying, all the ties and lead changes. And it's like, of course, it's fitting that this thing isn't going to end in regulation, and we hit a deep 3 to tie it up at the buzzer to play more basketball.
I mean, I think you're right about making the best of the situation, because because the pass, remember, it almost got away from her, and she kind of had to reach, and so that lost about a second worth of time. They inbounded with 4.5, so she had to make a decision pretty quick, and she got close. She had 2 hands in her face, and she still makes it over. I mean, it freaking swished, and it's like I've loved going back and watching the replays of it, because one, right behind the bench, her close personal friend Maris Leofau just does the double, this, holding his arms up in the air, and I think he kind of like thumped his chest a little bit. That was cool. But then watching the players as well, Leah Tu King starts screaming, and Olivia Miles starts screaming. Hannah Hidalgo's like jumping in the air, and King and Miles just kind of come together, and they do this sandwich, where they sandwich Sonia Citron after she made it. Probably the biggest single shot since Olivia Miles beat Louisville in overtime a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that when they beat Louisville in overtime at home, when Olivia Miles hit that shot at the end of the game. I think that's probably, the the biggest shot since then. It was pretty awesome. Yeah, Indy Sailor, Enrique 2.0. And the degree of difficulty might have even been bigger because of the hand that she had in her face on the shot. So pretty cool. So the New York Yankees have made a couple announcements in the last week. They've changed their facial hair policy to allow players to have well-groomed beards. And they're also going to stop playing Frank Sinatra's New York, New York in the stadium after losses. Which of these is more significant, Jesse?
To me, the facial hair policy is more significant. I could care less about what song they're playing when they lose, because they lose, and everyone loves when the Yankees lose at the end of the day. So I've always thought the facial hair thing was childish. These are grown adults making grown man money. I don't think you need to regulate what kind of facial hair that they have at the end of the day. And I think it's, often childish because you see some of these guys traded to the Yankees and they look like a completely different, younger version of themselves, essentially, at the end of the day. So it just felt like something that was unnecessary, and again, kind of extended that amount of control that they had for no, real reason.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's the facial hair policy, because I always just thought it was so stupid when you're considering grown men at the end of the day.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's amazing to me when you think about the fact that it took the Yankees longer than the military to change their facial hair policy, to ease up on the facial hair. Like I've looked back at some of the photos I have, from my time in the Army, and like back in those days, like the mustache couldn't go past like the crook of your mouth, like the corners of your mouth right here. So like if you did this, like you had to have it, and so guys would have these ridiculous looking, like mustaches, just up here on top of the mouth. But obviously, like when, things happened, in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff, they let them change it up a little bit, but the New York Yankees just stuck with it. And yeah, welcome to 2025. It's insane that it's taken this long. I guess people were complaining about the New York after they lost the World Series and they were playing it last year, like they were celebrating or something. It's like, who cares? It's a song. But you're absolutely right. Like the thing with the facial hair, these are grown men. They should be able to do what they want. They shouldn't have to adhere to that. So Peyton and Eli Manning are 3 seasons into their Manning cast now, going into year 4. Would you rather see them continue to do the alternate Monday Night Football broadcast, or have their current format be a main broadcast in, say, the number 2 or number 3 game for one of the networks on a Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I like the current situation. I think you keep them in Monday night. Moving them to Sunday is a little bit too regimented, and like, I like the fun and playfulness of their cast, and I don't think that it translates over to a main broadcast. I think it functions better as knowing it's the alternate, kind of maybe more fun, broadcast comparatively. And so I like keeping it where it's at. And then also, on Sundays, I'm pretty locked in regardless of who's playing. But Monday nights, I feel like sometimes I'm more hit and miss. And so having the Manning cast as the alternate kind of still lures me in to maybe some of those more uninterested, Monday night games, essentially. I think the better question would be, could they alternate between Thursdays and Mondays to relieve, how bad that Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit booth can be in bad games. That's the thing, is it's only in the bad games, because they both just drown in that misery or sorrow of how bad the game is. And that's the opposite. Like, the Manning cast is always bringing optimism, and like, a team could be down like 21 and Peyton's up there, talking about how can we get the ball down the field? How can we score a touchdown here? Like those sort of situations. And so I like those on the non-traditional Sunday games, because again, they find ways to bring, some spice to the only game on that day. On Sunday, I got other games I can watch. On those days, it's that game no matter what. And so having that alternate really helps me out.
That's a good point. I wouldn't want it as a standalone broadcast, because typically if I'm watching, those games, like if it's a Saturday game, it's because I want to watch the Cowboys, right? And if I want to watch, the Cowboys or, like insert whatever team. Like if I want to watch the game, I want to watch the game. I'm not looking for extra entertainment. I want to be able to focus on the game. And just the way they do it with the Manning cast, like you said, it's a nice alternative, but I wouldn't want it to be the main thing because they're up there on the screen and the whole thing. I want to see the actual football game, and I want them to be talking play by play, just like an announcer does, about what's actually going on and giving me detail on it. I like it as a changeup. I don't like it as a fastball. So I would stick with it where it is. You make a great point about Thursdays though. And like, I feel like Amazon with all those guys they've got in the pregame, like put Richard Sherman and
all
Big
the
Whit.
gadgets and stuff that they have too that they can do with like on screen movements,
Yeah.
like a live kind of whiteboard situation.
Yeah.
Like Amazon's got the technology where you could do, I think, some fun stuff. Like, how like, I don't know the last time you've watched the NBA on TNT, but how like Kenny the Jet will jump into the screen and it looks like he's on the court. Like doing something like that with Richard Sherman demoing, like a coverage scheme, or Ryan Fitzpatrick back there in the eyes of the quarterback and showing you, how the defense is moving and what you need to be like. That would be kind of fun, using technology to see the game through a lens of the player, basically.
I agree. That's a really good idea. And it feels like that, that's an opportunity for these streamers to do something like that. Like if Netflix,
I think it allows you to nerd out,
Yeah.
and allow kind of like the more, non-surface level fan to kind of go deeper into it than that kind of sub layer of knowledge, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and and again, like they've got all those guys there. If they're doing those Thursday games, they've got all those former NFL players there doing their pregame show anyway. And a lot of people really love that Amazon pregame show. I don't watch a ton of it. I don't watch a ton of pregame shows in general, but when I do, like, it's generally pretty entertaining. So why not lean into that a little bit more? What difference does it make if they're watching the mainstream? Just like Monday Night Football, they're willing, to split their audiences up between ESPN and ESPN2 because at the end of the day, there's still eyeballs, regardless of which channel it is. So, whether it's like Amazon with that existing Thursday night package, or if Netflix is going to get more into NFL going forward, do some more of that. Like I'm all about the alternate broadcast. As you know, like I keep saying, like it just feels like there's a golden opportunity for Notre Dame with Peacock, considering Peacock has so many issues with trying to get eyeballs there. It feels like rather than just doing a straight up simulcast of what's already on broadcast TV, it feels like that's an opportunity to do something different, but they've never done anything different with it. Fill in the blank. Stephen Jones of the Cowboys says the team is going to be, quote, selectively aggressive in its approach to free agents this offseason. That means you feel blank, Jesse.
So I don't know why you're wasting my time, the people's time with this question.
There's a reason this is the last question of the night.
Luckily, you put it at the end, so we don't. This is when everyone just rage quits and clicks off because they know it's coming. DK and his friends start drinking because the hot word is Cowboys. So, I'll believe it when I see it. The way it makes me feel is just meh. I've heard this story before. I've heard that, it's supposed to be better.
Isn't it just another edition of All In, from
That's
last
what I
year?
mean. It's just like, it's just, what do they call it? It's just putting makeup on a pig, right?
Yes,
the pig
perfume on a pig. Yeah.
The pig is still nasty and gross, and that's the organization of the Dallas Cowboys and just how they're run. And then the makeup or the perfume is all these little one-liners they give us in the off season or training camp or mid-season, and then nothing changes. This is the same franchise that traded for Trey Lance and gave up a draft pick, but now they're releasing him, and he did nothing but be your third-string quarterback who you gave no real development time to when Dak Prescott went down. You just went with the good old reliable Cooper Rush, knowing exactly what Cooper Rush is and what he brings to the table.
Yep.
But now you're releasing Trey. So it's just like
after you gave up a 4th-round pick.
You say all these things, but then you continue to double down on making stupid move after stupid move. and then you come out and you say stuff about the salary cap and you can't work a roster, and it's like, okay, well, the Eagles just won a Super Bowl with, more salary cap constraints. They're just lazy and not creative at the end of the day, and they just want to do things the way that they've been doing it for 30, 40 years and not really have to think outside the box too much. And so until I start seeing some creativity and whatever, then it's just you're stuck in the same old makeup on the pig situation.
No, I mean, that's exactly what it is. At the end of the day, like, they generally draft pretty well, especially at the top of the draft. They draft well at the top of the draft. Their issue every year is, like, they re-sign their big stars, but they don't re-sign, like the mid-level guys, like OC Odigizua. Like, he's up for free agency this year. Are they going to re-sign him, or is somebody going to offer him a lot more money to go play someplace else? Like, they're not able to retain those guys. And so what happens is the combination of the fact that they are generally not aggressive in free agency, they have to restock everything through the draft every year, and they've got so many immediate pressing needs in the draft, they can never address everything. And that's why they're in this constant, cycle, lather, rinse, repeat of just good enough, but not really good enough to compete for championships.
Yeah, and unfortunately that gets thrown on the shoulders of Dak Prescott. I just saw something the other day where it was just like, everyone was talking about, basically it was, Romo and Dak, both really good quarterbacks, edge of great elite quarterbacks, but for some reason they fell in the biggest moments in the playoffs. And it's like, well, maybe the common denominator isn't the quarterback, it's the things around the quarterback and the whole entire organization and team kind of laying an egg in those big situations, and it just gets shouldered to the quarterback, because that's what the NFL is. It's just a league, unfortunately, where wins and losses is all predicated about quarterback, and those losses and wins are given to the quarterback at the end of the day, right? Like, that's anytime a team loses, you blame the quarterback. You don't blame the team, you blame the quarterback. But unfortunately, the Cowboys as a team just haven't been, an organization, haven't been good for 20 years. And
30.
some of those players, unfortunately, have to shoulder that blame. So,
all right, we will end it with that, since I know Tommy loves the fact that we talk about the Dallas Cowboys.
It was like 3 minutes at the very end.
3 minutes after 90 minutes.
I'll give you guys 3 minutes of your day back. I'm sorry.
Right. But pay you for the time. All right. Appreciate you being here tonight. Good show. We will talk to you tomorrow. We've got a little mailbag coming up, so we will talk to you then. Ivy Nation Sports Talk.